Funding for Current Conversations is provided by the University of Oklahoma President's Office, OU Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis-Indiano. Today we're going to be talking about the most recent developments in Syria and the Middle East. Our guest is the distinguished expert on Syria, Dr. Joshua Landis. He is the director of the University of Oklahoma's Center for Middle Eastern Studies and a frequent contributor to print and media around the world. Today's show is the second of a two-part series in which we continue to discuss the major players in Syria and some of the forces shaping its future. Join us for this fascinating conversation. Dr. Joshua Landis, thank you for coming back for part two of our show on Syria today.
It's a pleasure.
Great to have you here. Okay, in part one, we talked about, you talked about the evolution of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and you talked about the complex subject of the Sunni rebel groups. Talked a little bit about how they've evolved. It's a very complex, dynamic picture, of course. Let me pick things up again and ask you to talk about the Salafi jihadist groups. How are they different from the Sunni rebel groups, and how have they developed as a force in Syria?
Well, there is a cadre of Sunni salafists. Now, Salafism is a movement that really, it starts already in the 19th century, but it's a reform movement, a fundamentalist reform movement that wants to return to, that sees true Islam as that's embodied in the first three generations and of followers of Muhammad, people who knew Muhammad and could remember him. And those people theoretically had a special wisdom, sort of like the founding fathers of America. Whenever we have questions about our Constitution or how society should be organized, we look back at the founding fathers. What was their intent? And that's the Salafist movement. And they have developed that into a very fundamentalist ideology, one that got added onto it a jihadist element in the 1950s. An important figure called Sayyid Qutb, who was a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in the 1950s, radicalized. He was put in a jail by Nasser, the dictator of Egypt, tortured there, but he wrote a multi-volume work called Under the Shade of the Quran. And in it, he said that that we're living in a modern day of ignorance, jahiliyyah, just the way Muhammad, who grew up in Mecca in the 7th century, lived in the 6th and 7th century, lived in a period of paganism. And he gets revelation from God to bring monotheism. And Sayyid Qutb said, we're living in another age of paganism. And the proof of that is that most Arabs have lost any real spiritual sense of Islam. And look at somebody like Nasser. His photo is on TV every night. It's on the big posters on the wall, like Stalin in Russia. And this worshiping of dictators and strongmen, these are idols. And they have left the true spirit of Islam. Sharia law, which is supposed to, he claimed, embody true Islam, is nowhere to be found. So nationalism, Western ideology. Yeah. The forms of government, republicanism and everything that were not being followed, but were at least supposed to be followed, were all these Western adaptations. And he said, we've gone wrong. Not only have we left the true Islam of the caliphate and so forth, but we've left the spirit of Islam with Sharia law.
So whereas the Sunni rebel groups are basically communities and sort of tribal organizations that are trying to survive, and they're sort of dynamic in their dedication, orientation, the Salafi jihadists, they're not, they have a direction.
They have a direction, and they have a minhaj, as they say. They've got a plan. And that's been worked out through decades of persecution in Syria, where Assad smashed the Muslim Brotherhood, but in Egypt and other places. And we've seen, and the radical element, what Sayyid Qutb argued, is that because we're living in this new age of ignorance or jahiliyyah, we have to do what Muhammad did, and that is fight against them. And we've got to bring monotheism again. So he puts jihad back at the center of Islamic fundamentalism. And he says jihad is a central pillar. To be like Muhammad, to do what Muhammad did, you got to fight jihad.
So how large is this group, and how great?
Well, it's been spreading. And this is, there are a lot of salafists, but there's a wing of salafists that say, we have to kill our leaders, that we can. This is a revolutionary idea, like Leninism. We can overthrow the Nassers, the Assads, the Saddam Husseins. We can kill them because they're pagans. And so in order to carry out jihad, we have to kill these people. They're not true Muslims. And so this idea of takfir, which is to call them kafirs and to apostatize them and say they're not Muslims and therefore we can kill them, is so revolutionary. It's not part of Islam traditionally. It's a new phenomenon, but it's spread like wildfire.
To look ahead just a moment, because we haven't talked about ISIS yet, it must be easy for them to join up with ISIS because of the similar kind of attitude about the opposition.
ISIS grows out of this Salafist stream, and so does al-Qaeda. That's what bin Laden was doing. That's what Zawahiri is doing in Afghanistan. And now, what bin Laden does to Sayyid Qutb is he adds a new radical chapter, which is, we're going to fail bringing down the Egyptian dictatorship or the Saudi dictatorship. Because, why? Because America is supporting them. Now, ISIS comes along in the middle of Iraq and says, all this fighting the far enemy, that's fine. But what we really need to do is set up a caliphate today, here.
Before we go to that, because I want us to stay on ISIS for a bit once we get there, could we talk about the Kurds? People, if they know nothing about the Kurds, they hear in the news that who seems to be most effective in pushing ISIS back very often are the Kurds. Who are they? How have they evolved?
The Kurds are not Arabs. They're not Persians. They're not Turks. There are three major ethnicities in the Middle East that most people know about. They're the Turks, that originally, in the distant past, come from Central Asia, Turco-Mongolians. There are the Persians, who are Iran, and they're related linguistically. The Indo-Europeans start out in the Caucasus. Some go down to Persia and over to northern India. Others come up into Europe.
They don't speak Arabic. They speak Persian.
They speak Persian, but Persian is related to English and European languages. The word for daughter in Persian is daughter. The word for brother is brader. The word for father is pater, for patriotism. So we are, English language is linked to Persian. Then there's Arabic, which is a Semitic language, completely different. But there are the Kurds. The Kurds did not get a state in the First World War when the British and French were dividing up the Ottoman Empire. They divided this big Kurdish population that is, Kurdish language is related to Persian, it's Indo-European, but they're divided into four different communities. About 15% of all Turkish citizens are Kurdish, 10% of Syria Kurdish, 20% of Iraqis are Kurdish, and another 6 or 7 million are in Iran. So you've got a big Kurdish population.
Now, is this right? It seems to me that the Kurds have not been as involved in the fight against ISIS at the same level over the last, maybe since 2011. It seems like they've gotten more involved recently. Is that correct?
They have, and that's because of the United States. The United States, the Kurds live in great insecurity. The civil war in Iraq and the civil war in Syria allowed them to build their own state structures and to sort of emerge from a position of being subjugated by Arabs to being, today, all but independent. They have their own militias, their own flags, their own schools. They're teaching in Kurdish. The new generation of Kurds in Iraq, in northern Iraq, don't even speak Arabic anymore because the second language that's taught in school is English and Turkish. Nobody wants to learn Arabic anymore. So it's changing. It's like Catalan in Spain or something. Things are changing rapidly. And Syria is now 10% along the northern border of Syria with Turkey has emerged this state, which is called Rojava by the Kurds. Assad is very worried that it's going to get independence. So are the Turks. But the United States, to get us back to why is America helping the Kurds today? It's helping the Kurds because ISIS conquered all this Arab territory, butting up against the Kurdish state, the Sunni Arab region. America wants to destroy that. The American people are demanding of their president, destroy them today. They chopped off the heads of a few Americans, they're going to blow us up. But we don't want you to use any Americans to kill them. You can bomb them from the sky, but ultimately you need to occupy their territory. So who are we going to partner with? We have to find a partner. The Kurds said, I'll do it. They raised their hand. They said, I'll help you do that. You give us lots of arms. You build us up. You recognize us as an independent state. So America, in a sense, has harnessed the national ambitions of the Kurds.
Have we promised them that we'll support them in founding an independent state?
No.
Okay.
We haven't. They're hoping we will.
They're hoping we will, yeah.
And that's the way things sort of worked out in Iraq, where the United States helped the Kurds in 1990 to rise up against Saddam Hussein. We never promised them a state, but we gave them arms. And by destroying Saddam Hussein, ultimately in 2003, we created the opening for a Kurdish state.
How is it the Kurds are so effective against ISIS? That's what you hear in the news. Other soldiers run away. ISIS scares people. They do horrendous things. The Kurds just seem to push back very hard and make inroads and defeat ISIS where others can't. What's their secret? What's
They're
that
fighting
about?
for their country. And
They have a deep buy-in.
they have deep buy-in. And there is a lot of area between the 100% Kurdish regions, of which there really aren't that many. There's Arabs mixed in. But ISIS had conquered up into the Kurdish areas that Kurds want for Kurdistan, that have Kurds in them. Kurds had fled. So the Kurds had fire in their belly. They thought ISIS is coming to take all of our territory, which it would have done if it could have. And so when America gave them arms, they turned on these ISIS people who were gobbling up their territory and ethnically cleansing Kurds in front of them with real viciousness and hate in their hearts. And so that was just the kind of enemy or partner that America needed.
They're sort of legendary at this point, how successful they were. And the Kurdish women fighters are just, unstoppable. And that embarrasses ISIS because they're women Kurds that are defeating them.
And that battle began. America began helping the Syrian Kurds 2014 in a city called Kobani. It's right on the border with Turkey, 200,000 Kurds. ISIS attacked it, had ethnically cleansed almost all the Kurds who had fled into Turkey. But a bunch of Kurds were staying there fighting. America began to give them arms, airdropped arms in, and they fought back. And it was sort of miraculous. They rallied, and then America said, these are our guys. Now, Turkey was saying, don't do it. Turkey wanted ISIS to clobber the Kurds,
right,
so that they wouldn't create their own state.
Solve a problem for them.
And the Kurds saw this as, okay, Turkey's stabbing us in the back, ISIS is getting us from the front, we only have America. And America said, we like these people. They're winning against ISIS. This is just after ISIS had chopped off the heads of those American reporters and so forth. And so we began funneling in arms. Turkey was up and it was infuriated. And so were a lot of the rebels in Syria because they saw the danger that Kurds in America would gang up and...
Now to roll things into the present, are the Kurds still engaged in pushing ISIS back?
They are. Now the trouble is the Kurds have taken most territory that is majority Kurdish away from these ISIS.
So some of their motivation is...
Their motivation is weak.
Yeah.
Their motivation today, they don't want more territory that's just Arab because they're going to have a problem on their hands.
Right.
But we, the United States, wants them to push down another level and take Raqqa. Raqqa is a provincial capital, a few 100,000 people that ISIS owns and is now the capital of ISIS territory in Syria. We want the Kurds to take it, but we don't want them to stay there. We want them to take it and then leave so that an Arab government can be formed. Why would the Kurds ever do this? Get a whole bunch of Kurds fighting as this very difficult enemy for what? So the Kurds say, well, we'll do it, but you have to promise us independence. You have to arm us. You have to train our army. Turkey's saying, don't do it. Turkey's saying, don't use the Kurds to take it. We want to train up other Arab forces, but they're not ready. You have to wait 6 months. So America's caught in this difficult situation.
Now, would it be fair to say that ISIS are the great opportunists in all of this? The government gets involved in a civil war. They're the Salafi jihadists. They're the Sunni Arab rebels, et cetera. And ISIS comes in and do they come right out of the Salafi group?
They do. They come out of al-Qaeda. They are al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Zawahiri is really the founder. Zawahiri, who became the major enemy of America in Iraq, helped turn the war into a sectarian religious war by blowing up Shiite mosques, because he understood America is going to rule and put the Shiites on the top of Iraq.
He was sort of the Secretary of War for
Bin Laden.
Bin Laden,
And yes,
sorry, yeah.
yes, he was. Now, he moved off and did what he wanted to. Even when Bin Laden said, don't just attack Shiites, that's not good, we want to keep Islam together, Zawahiri said, forget it, I'm in charge here. And he became his own operator and really just built up this major movement. Now, America suppressed it. Before leaving in 2010, we had really begun to defeat al-Qaeda. The trouble is, we left Iraq and Syria exploded into civil war. Once Syria exploded into civil war, all these cadres of al-Qaeda that were hiding slipped into Syria, where they began to take advantage of the fact that Assad's power in the eastern part of the country, the part along the Iraqi border, had completely collapsed once the rebellion started. And America began to help Saudi Arabia and others shovel in arms. Assad was up against it. It was no man's land, and they began to build a state. And they grew up in Syria, and then they went back into Iraq, and they took all the Sunni parts of Iraq in one summer, 2014, without almost a shot being fired.
It was frightening. I mean, they took land so quickly, they just seemed unstoppable. A lot of that was easy taking, though, right?
It was, because the army that America had built and trained and armed didn't know who they were fighting for. We had put into place this Constitution of Iraq that nobody believed in. Nationalism was not a powerful force. And we had mixed Sunnis and Shiites and Kurds together in this army. They weren't going to get killed fighting ISIS. They didn't know who they were fighting for, so they ran away rather than get killed. Right. And they left tons of American arms, cannons, tanks, Humvees in place that ISIS got, and it turned ISIS into this major military power.
Could you talk a little bit about Arab Spring? I mean, as you focus on the details of the different players that are part of the story in Syria, it doesn't seem like there's room for anything as positive sounding as the Arab Spring, and yet there seemed to be an Arab Spring in 2011. Was there really an Arab Spring? Was there really a possibility of a kind of renaissance of attitudes? How do you see that?
Well, there was a real Arab Spring. There was, of course, it began in Tunisia, 2010, with this young guy who burned himself because he couldn't get a job. The police were hounding him. He was a pushcart guy. He had an engineering degree. He was educated, but he represented this army of unemployed youth, a youth bulge, big population explosion, but no jobs, bad government, corruption, you name it. All of these things conspired and globalization, which was creating this big income gap. He didn't know what to do. He was humiliated, so he just set himself on fire. And that brought out tons of young people. And of course, it was caught on YouTube. Somebody videoed it, and it went viral. So new technology changed the way people organized and helped undermine the authoritarian state. And the authoritarian state had gotten old and cranky. All of these governments that grew up after World War II, secular dictatorships, had been under dictators like Ben Ali and so forth, who had been there for 30 years. Assad's 40 years. Mubarak, 30 years in Egypt. They'd been there forever. And they were going to put their children in after them. They were turning their houses into dynasties. So the people rose up, led by young people who weren't organized. The trouble with this moment is that it wasn't a liberal uprising. There were tons of liberals, but they were disorganized. Behind them were Muslim Brothers, were other Islamist groups, the salafists we've been talking about, al-Qaeda, who were waiting in the wings and willing to really sacrifice. They had an organization, they had cells, they knew how to fight, they could import people who knew how to fight, and they've when it turned to war, they've predominated. We see that in Libya, Yemen, Syria.
Didn't many of the leaders that were part of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, weren't they part of the group at Camp Bucca, the American camp, and they had all that time to sit there and stew and make plans with each other and radicalize and then just erupted when they got out of Camp Bucca?
They did. Caliph Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, was in Camp Bucca, and a lot of his lieutenants were there. He got to know them in this American prison. Now, they were political prisoners by and large because they were enemies who were talking about jihad and other stuff like that. But America released them because we didn't know what to do with all these people. There are tons of young men like this. They got radicalized. They got released. They formed this organization with a lot of Sunni officers from Saddam's army who were also cashiered by the United States. So it was a lethal brew of young ideologues with military generals and colonels who really knew how to fight. They came together and formed this brutal organization.
Some people have pointed out or asserted that with all of these forces at work that you're talking about after 2011 and the radicalization of the Islamist view, all coincided with the U.S. dialing back its involvement in the region. And the famous Obama drawing the red line. And then when there were weapons of mass destruction and they were actually using chemical weapons, et cetera, didn't back it up. Is that did the U.S. help to create a moment of opportunism? Does the U.S. Bear responsibility here? Hillary Clinton said that she would have put in a no-fly zone around that time. And so presumably all those millions of immigrants that fled out of the region and across Europe and helped to stabilize governments, all of that wouldn't have happened. Let me just jump ahead for a second. It seems to create a vacuum where Russia comes in and really becomes a player. What about the U.S. dialing back? And
America's very split over this very question. Should we have doubled down in Syria, given more arms to rebels, played a bigger role? There are many analysts who argue that. I argued from the beginning we should not get in there. We should not make false promises to Syrian rebels because Assad's stronger than we think. Syrian society is fragmented. And American people have lost their interest in helping Middle Easterners after 2 failed missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. We weren't going to carry through. If we made promises and then it cost a lot of money, we weren't going to spend the money. We would abandon them. And that's what we've done. And I think it was better not to get involved in a situation that was going to require something America really doesn't have to give, which is knowing how to reorganize society in a fragmented, it's nation building.
Nation building, yeah.
And by saying Assad had to step aside, building Friends of Syria, 97 nations under Hillary Clinton that were organized to help the rebellion. And in a sense, promising them that we would help them and getting Saudis and other Gulfs organized to send in the money. We ensured that the civil war went on for a lot longer than it has. Assad is going to win because the Russians have escalated, Iran has escalated, Hezbollah. A lot of other forces that don't want to see him fall have escalated, which I think Obama sort of knew was going to happen at a certain point and decided he wasn't going to escalate. He didn't want to escalate against Russia for Syria. And that's what he said. In 2015, when the Russians went in with the Air Force, first words out of Obama's mouth, we're not going to fight a proxy war with Russia for Syria. And that was lights out for the rebellion, really.
We're going to run out of time again. I've got to ask you this. What do you see happening in 2017 in Syria, looking ahead in your crystal ball?
What we're seeing today is a new security architecture being established in the northern Middle East. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran. Iranian influence is being imposed over these 3 Arab countries by helping, the way they've done it is by helping Shiites to power in each country. Hezbollah, the representative of the Shiite minority in the south, it's actually the biggest single community in Lebanon, but Shiites in the south of Lebanon, keeping Assad in power in Syria. And of course, the Americans have done all the heavy lifting to put Shiites in power in Iraq, but that has redounded to Iran's interests. Mm-hmm. So Iran has spread their militias and armies that they've helped train. Russia has jumped in and helped with this and allied with Iran to help Shiites. They've justified it and argued we need to do that because we have to destroy terrorism and Sunni extremism. And the only way to do that is to fire up Shiites who will destroy ISIS and al-Qaeda. And America's done it too, because once we changed Iraq, got rid of the dictators, Saddam was saying there was chaos, ISIS spread. Now, America is befuddled. On the one hand, you will hear lots of generals and other policy people say, Iran's a malevolent force, it's no friend of America, it's a supporter of terrorism, and it's spreading its power aggressively over this Arab world.
And we need to tear up the nuclear agreement.
We need to put Iran back in its box, isolate it, contain it. The trouble is, our military strategy is exactly the opposite. Our military strategy is to help Shiite militias that are supported by Iran in Iraq destroy ISIS, is to stand by, and as Trump has said, we need to team up with the Russians to destroy ISIS. So in a sense, our strategy is to keep Assad in power in Syria today and to single-mindedly fight ISIS.
In spite of what we've said, our real strategy is...
That is our real strategy. And because the Sunni rebellion turned Salafist, al-Qaeda, ISIS emerged as the strongest forces in it, and now we're trying to destroy them. And in order to do that, we're empowering Shiite militias that can do the heavy lifting. So in a sense, there is this new security architecture being imposed. America is retreating to, and will have to be, in a sense, consolidate its authority in the Gulf, where the majority of the oil is. And we're helping the Saudis, we're selling lots of arms to them, we're helping them destroy the Shiites in Yemen, we've helped them suppress Shiites in Bahrain and other places. And that's, in a sense, a division of labor. A Shiite-dominated North, a Sunni-dominated South.
That's where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you for doing 2 shows with us. This has really been awesome.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me on.
I'm so glad that you could be with us today for this important discussion with Dr. Joshua Landis about the recent developments in Syria. Be with us next time for more Current Conversations.